right now on 23.5. We'll hear from oil giant ExxonMobil answering claims they knew about climate change back in the 1980s. But even in the 1990s, publicly were casting doubt on the threat. And green design, way ahead of its time. One man building energy-efficient homes long before it became a trend. He was using old tires and trash to make his off-the-grid earthships. All right now on 23.5. The word backbone is a symbol of resiliency for our next guest. It is also the name of his organization that practices what he calls artful activism, with kayaks one of their preferred weapons of protest. Please meet Bill Moyer. Bill, very few times do I ever get a chance to talk to someone who made up their own word. What's kayaktivism?
Well, kayaktivism is a practice of taking social change onto the water in a human-powered craft. How's that?
So anyone with a kayak or a floaty.
Oh yeah, Barney inflatable, fine, whatever.
But you actually do get a message across.
So kayaktivism is a way to connect people to each other, not just to protest, but to connect people to each other, because there's a lot of need for them to be taking care of each other out in the water. The water is inherently dangerous, especially when it's as cold as it is here. Mm-hmm. And then, it also connects people to the place they love. I don't know if you've ever been out to the Puget Sound, and
I have, and it's beautiful.
Our organizing in the last few years has been challenging the idea that our area, the best use of our area, is to make it a fossil fuel corridor to Asia. And so last year, when Shell Oil decided to make Seattle its base of operations for its Arctic drilling project, it gave folks who've been very concerned about climate and very concerned about Arctic drilling a way to interact with that problem in a very sort of David versus Goliath moment. We like to say that love wins, in that when we're fighting from that place, it's unassailable, really.
A lot of the stuff you do is very visual, like putting images up on buildings at night and things like that.
Right. So projection is protest. We sent lights to about 20 different cities. It's a very low cost kind of guerrilla action that doesn't hurt anybody. It allows people to express themselves and amplify their voices when they don't usually have access to the mainstream media.
So is that what you're trying to do, is make this grassroots conversation?
Making sure that the society is reflecting the values of the people that are in it. The Backbone campaign started about 14 years ago during the Bush administration by a bunch of artists here on Vashon Island. And some of the most visible pieces have been things like, the Bush chain gang. We've done a number of things around money, trying to get money out of politics, with taking over the Lincoln Memorial with a 150-foot We the People replica of the Constitution preamble, signed by thousands of people. We've put a sold sign on the U.S. Capitol lawn. We've also done a lot more serious organizing around things like eviction protection, student debt, now $1.4 trillion debt we're putting on our youth when we should be providing them with education.
You've got a brand new book coming out, Solutionary Rail. I love this. Let's propose something that works for everybody but is cleaner.
Railroads became very dependent upon moving heavy fossil fuel commodities, specifically coal, because it shipped all year round and it could only stay on the tracks. So that created this dependent relationship, and that eventually became very dependent upon just moving heavy commodities by a few big customers, and they stopped doing schedules. So communities lost service. Workers no longer had a work schedule. How are we supposed to have a vibrant society if the people we depend on in our rural communities aren't getting the service they need? How are we supposed to have family farms if they can't get their crops to market? And solving the problem in the U.S. means overcoming the current business model that rail is using. It's been an incredible learning experience over the last few years to be educated by railroad workers and railroad experts, and the rest of the world does it differently. So we've been working really hard to create this solutionary rail, and fundamental to that is that the public use its capacity to get bonds and low interest finance to build out a rail electrification infrastructure that won't be built by the private railroads. And at the same time, we can unleash an incredible build out of renewable energy generation out in rural America, because they will have a customer for those electrons at, peak production. And if we're really smart, we'll put an overhead above the regular lines for the trains. We will put high voltage transmission to make sure that those electrons can also get to population centers, so that we can stabilize the variability of renewable energy. And that's what Solutionary Rail is offering as an alternative to things like oil trains, pipelines, etc.
You solve so many issues with this. I really want people to read it. It's tough to pin you down because you guys do so many actions and you take on so many topics. You guys were at the Dakota access pipeline not long ago.
It's having a very large impact. Representatives from more than 250 tribes from around the country and beyond have gathered on the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation to show solidarity and a spiritual resistance against the pipeline that's proposed, the Dakota Access Pipeline. The tribes have been absolutely pivotal and critical in their leadership on stopping fossil fuel shipments and infrastructure in the Pacific Northwest. And nobody's really better suited to lead in that way than Indigenous people. So a lot of non-native allies are also encamped there. When I left, I think there were probably 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people there.
Activism, it seems to be every part of you. But how you found the name for your organization, the Backbone Campaign, to me, is pretty deep and powerful as well. You were on an action and fell, what was it, like 40, 50 feet?
Yeah, and actually, I was watching the sunset. So I'd like to say it was on some action, but it was watching the sunset. And
you were up in a tree that high watching the sunset?
Youth. I was up there and it was beautiful, man. I don't know if you've climbed trees, but when you get to the top of the tree, you see the rolling of the land, you see the birds flitting from treetop to treetop. It's pretty fantastic. And I stepped on a branch and it broke at the top of a fir tree, and I fell down 60 feet. And I had I think, besides an angel that was holding me, there were branches that were breaking as I went down. So I landed, I was alive, so to my very surprise and pleasure. But I tried to get up. My arms weren't broken, my legs weren't broken, but I tried to get up. And that's when that moment of fear hit me in an unconscious place. I think that the knowledge of what it feels like to not have a backbone, and seeing progressives and liberals in this country kind of in that experience, it's not about asking politicians or corporations for favors. It's about building moral power among normal people. And we can have all the great ideas in the world, but if we don't have the social movement, what I would call the body or the backbone, we will not have the capacity to stand up and support those ideas and propel those ideas into society.
So if people want to reach out to you, how do they find you?
Go to BackboneCampaign.org. We have tools online there that folks can access, forms that they can fill out to say they want to sign up for training, or they want to have our help with an action, or they want to learn how to do light projection. So BackboneCampaign.org. There are hundreds and hundreds of people who are part of Backbone Campaign, who I consider part of Team Backbone, and it's those people that I have the honor to work with who make all of this possible.
Moyer tells us his Solutionary Rail project is the most ambitious effort his group has ever undertaken, and it paves the way, he hopes, for a clean energy future. Now, coming up, Exxon and climate change. There are claims the oil giant knew internally of the global warming threat presented by fossil fuels decades ago. But the action they took publicly shows a very different stance. So what did they say?